So, welcome to my series where I'm going over the bankruptcy petition. Now, today, as you can see here, we're going over official form 106, which is a summary of your assets and liabilities and certain statistical information. Realistically, this is something you have to go back to once you've completed a bankruptcy petition, but I'm doing everything in order. So it might seem a little bit out of order, but I'm going straight as how the bankruptcy courts have it on their websites with all the forms, because I don't want people bouncing around trying to figure out, wait a minute, where does all this fit into the scheme of things? So, but I'm still going to give a breakdown on this, and it'll probably make sense once you've completed everything just to go back, because we're doing everything in pieces and we have to come around and do a full circle. So all this really is, as you can see, is just a summary. Now, there's a couple things that I'll point out because, for one, I use bankruptcy software, but I always go back when it summarizes this part here. Remember, the bankruptcy software basically mirrors all the bankruptcy forms in the petition. So it's just different. It's easier. You just type in the information, and for example, it'll do the math for you. But I still go back to this just because it really helps me pick up errors. So, for example, if you look here, you're just looking up at all the assets. Did you list your personal property? Did you list your real property? But I'll tell you where the real issues start to come in, and you have to start focusing. For one, is this here: was all your debt listed? Does it? I always look for things that basically ring alarm bells. Even though each time I work on this, it's a different client. You'll see something and say, "Well, wait a minute, let me look into this." So, for example, unsecured claims, are they too high or too low? If it's too high, why is it high? Were creditors duplicated? Sometimes, for example, you go off a credit report and you see that there's a credit, I don't know, whatever, Bank of America, that debt has been sold three times over, and so to three different collection agencies. So now you put $20,000 down four times in total, and all of a sudden you have 80,000 in unsecured debt, and the trustee is going to start asking a lot of questions. And sometimes even at that level, there might be even involvement from the U.S. trustee's office, which is going to start looking into fraud. So I start to make sure these numbers make any sense. And then potentially, if I see that there is too much debt because something's it's been artificially inflated with these debt collection agencies being repeated, I do make notes, and you'll see that when we go over the unsecured debt, saying original creditor Bank of America, or for example, Bank of America's original creditor, you owe them $20,000, but then I'll put for the debt collection agency notice only because they haven't started any lawsuits, so they're just notifying you of this debt. So I put zero, and that's the practice that most bankruptcy lawyers do. Because trust me, if you have, even if all the debt is perfect and it's legit, if you get a letter from the bankruptcy attorney saying, please explain to me why this debt is so high, you're now taking time out to respond to this letter. It could take a couple of hours to get this organized. And you know what? You're not getting paid for those couple of hours. So I like to, nip it in the bud and avoid issues ahead of time if possible. Now, here's one that's definitely important: income versus expenses. Once you've done Schedule I, which is based on your current monthly income, and Schedule J, current monthly expenses, that is separate from the means test, you got to look at these two numbers, because if these two numbers are off, then the question is why. So, for example, if you put $4,000 in income and then your expenses are $3,000, you have $1,000 left over. This is going to be a problem for the bankruptcy trustee. $1,000 means you can skip, and we're here. Let me jump over here real quick. You can skip chapter 7. We're going straight to chapter 13, and you're going to be paying $1,000 a month for the next 36 to 60 months. Something went wrong, because if you never advised the client of chapter 13, everything was chapter 7 the whole time through, or now all of a sudden you're saying, how do we get to such a high number for chapter 13 bankruptcy plan, which you have to submit within 14 days of filing the petition? That's where you'll see the alarm bells. And realistically, when you've looked at a petition, whether on your own, you're filing on your own, or as a paralegal or a lawyer, sometimes you look at these things so many times that it's hard to pick up the error. I remember having conversations with lawyers saying, yeah, we always have an error in our bankruptcy petition. Nothing, none of end of world catastrophic, anything like that. But the trustee says, hey, you did this, make sure you amend it later on. So it's never a big deal. But again, because you look at it so much. So I always go through multiple ways of looking at it, not only through the program, but I also download it into PDF to see that. And then sometimes I even print it up just to have all three versions. Trust me, will give you a different perspective on the bankruptcy petition. So it's definitely important to review it. But that's why I like the summary, because you might pick up something like this and then realize, wait a minute, $1,000 disposable income, something went wrong here. So it's a good way to catch an error. And again, it's important to catch these errors only because of the reality that if you don't, and then the trustee makes you change something, now again you're doing all this extra work, you're not getting paid for it. So nobody wants to work additionally and not get compensated. All right. So whether you file chapter 7 or 13, that's pretty obvious, right? This is pretty much going to be the same just about for every client. Typically the issue is if there's a business. I do have blogs focusing on the business, and let me make a note of that now, regarding, for example, LLCs. Too many times people think because they have a business, they can do bankruptcy for the business and that's it. The reality is, the small business owners like you and I, we are personally liable for that debt. So a bankruptcy for your business isn't going to do anything because they're still going to sue you personally. So typically I do the opposite. I just tell clients, if you shut down the business, you can't sue a non-existent business, but they will sue you. So let's just do the personal bankruptcy. Instead of hiring me for two cases, you hire me for one. Clients, of course, love that. They love to hear it. It's being honest, unlike lawyers that sometimes do two bankruptcies unnecessarily. All right. Now, current monthly income, that is what we're talking about with the means test. We got ways to go on that. Although if you have my textbook, you can read into the means testing. But means testing, even though it says monthly current income, it's not about monthly current income. It's the complete opposite. It's the last 6 months. But we'll go over the means testing. We'll run some numbers as well, and I'll show you how the means test, why the means test is actually criticized, just because some of the loopholes and some of the things that just don't make sense with the means test. Now, this last part here, domestic support obligations. Why is this important? Well, first place, again, let's look at the total claim. Is the number too high? The problem that you'll catch when you're completing the forms, whether on your own or as a paralegal or even a lawyer, is that you might have a client when they're doing their intake, they have $200, deducted from their pay stub every or paycheck every 2 weeks. Then they go through other parts of your intake, and then they say other expenses. They go, yeah, they have child support. Now all of a sudden you've doubled the expenses. Why is that an issue? Because now, if going based on that example, it's $400. Once, if the numbers were perfect, right, and there was no real disposable income available, once you subtract that artificial number, you have $400 left available, which pushes the client back to chapter 13. So again, it's important to go through this because you want to make sure, even though we're talking sections here of um, of the petition, there's some parts that are repeated where you have not only your expenses, but also on the section when it comes to income, they have deductions. And those deductions could be child support's withdrawn. Just depends if it's an automatic wage garnishment that's being done or not. Now, taxes, important. You can't always wipe that out. We'll go over the exceptions. As a general rule, I always tell people, yeah, the government's always going to get their money, but there are exceptions for taxes. I think offhand, if I remember correctly, what's the magical number? 5 years. So if you haven't paid your taxes in 5 years, you filed but you never paid, then you can wipe it out with bankruptcy. Student loans, very important. Are you going to wipe out your student loans with filing for bankruptcy? No. The reality is you have to do what's called an adversary process, which is a litigated bankruptcy case. But here's the catch. A lot of times I've had clients or debtors put that they continue to put or continue to make payments on their student loans just to make sure there's no disposable income. Or sometimes I've told them, call your student loan lender, start making payments so we can reduce your disposable income so we don't have a problem for chapter 7. So sometimes it's the other way around. We have to do this. Now, likewise, I've had clients who have been trying to work out a payment arrangement with the student loan lender and they just refuse. They're not flexible at all. Client ends up filing for bankruptcy, and all of a sudden the lender says, okay, we'll leave you alone for a while. Let's start working out a payment plan. So sometimes I've been able to change the monthly or get to a monthly installment when it wasn't possible before. So keep that in mind. Sometimes it helps a case to pay it. Sometimes it's the other way around. It's a good way to have a creditor leave you alone, such as any student loan provider, and allow the client some sort of flexibility. Now, domestic support obligations, right? This remember that what we call DSOs, you cannot wipe them out in bankruptcy, child support and alimony. Bankruptcy isn't gonna get rid of those obligations, but it does help also regarding the issue if the client is truly separated from their spouse. Remember, I've mentioned before, sometimes people pretend they're separated just to qualify under Chapter 7. But the other issue here too is money. A lot of times there's a home involved, and the problem with that is if the home is going to be sold and there's these loan proceeds, unless that money rolls over into a new homestead property, that property will not be protected. So, just imagine a client who says, "Well, I'm getting $40,000 from my divorce settlement from selling of the house. I can't really afford anything with that kind of deposit, but you know what? It gives me some financial room." Not if you file for bankruptcy. You're going to lose that protection of that $40,000. I've always said just because money's here, and let me draw it this way, it's protected here. Put two X's here. Money's okay here, and then all of a sudden it comes over here, and then it's not protected. And an example of that is your 401k. I've seen people before take out the money of these protected accounts, put it in their checking account, and then I tell them, "Why is there 10,000 in the account?" "That's my 401k." I said, "Well, that's not protected now. You got to put the money back." And this is the same scenario if there is an issue where there's going to be loan or net proceeds from the sale of the home. You have to now plan in advance, how is this going to work? Because at the end of the day, if the client isn't buying a house and they're sitting on $40,000, there's going to be a $40,000 problem. The trustee is going to take it. Okay. So that wraps up this brief video regarding the summary. It was necessary to go through this because you're going to have to come back to us just to make sure all of this makes sense and we can put everything, everything comes full circle. The next video is now going to start focusing on the actual assets and applying the exemptions in the bankruptcy petition.